Today I'm going to show you how to easily make hard cider at home. I'm flavoring this cider with mango, which gives this a sweet fragrance and a subtle fruity tropical taste. You don't need a bunch of equipment, and this recipe only uses 4 ingredients. I'm Trent Musho, and you're watching The Brew Show. Let's make some mango hard cider. Anyone can make hard cider. I promise, it's easy and I'll show you how. If you're interested in homebrewing and want to simplify techniques and recipes, please take a second to subscribe to my channel so you can ride along on this homebrewing journey with me. If you have access to fresh apple juice, then that will work perfectly. But today we're keeping things simple and we're using store-bought apple juice. This recipe calls for 2 gallons of juice and will yield just under 2 gallons once complete. But feel free to scale this recipe up or down to make as much as you'd like. For store-bought juice, you want to make sure it has no preservatives, usually written as sorbates, sulfites, or benzoates. These preservatives will inhibit the yeast from doing its job. If you want to know the alcohol percentage, now would be a good time to take a specific gravity reading of the juice with the hydrometer or refractometer. In most cases, store-bought apple juice comes in with an original gravity of 1.050. Now I put the juice in a fermenter. I'm using a conical fermenter, but you can use a food-grade safe bucket, or at some stores you can find 1-gallon glass jugs of apple juice and ferment in that. It's a good idea to also make sure your fermenter and anything else that comes in contact with your cider is clean and sanitized. This will just make sure no wild yeast or bacteria infect your cider, making it undrinkable. Next, I add the yeast nutrient, 2 teaspoons. These nutrients are needed to feed the yeast so that I can have happy, healthy yeast, and I can limit off flavors that come from poor yeast health. It will also help kick off fermentation faster. You don't have to put in yeast nutrient, but it will help make better cider. Speaking of yeast, I'm using Lavlin EC1118 champagne yeast. I like this yeast because it's highly attenuative, meaning the yeast will eat more of the fermentable sugars, so I end with a lower final gravity, making the cider taste drier and not as sweet. But if you want a sweeter cider, feel free to try one of the many other kind of yeast out there. You can find yeast and yeast nutrient at your local homebrew store, but I've also linked to some options in the description. I'd love to know, do you like your cider sweet or more on the dry side? Let me know in the comments. So I have the juice, yeast nutrient, and yeast in the fermenter. I pop a top on and I shake it around to mix things up and incorporate oxygen. Oxygen is important as fermentation starts so that the yeast can use it to do their job. But once fermentation is in full swing, it's important to avoid oxygen as much as possible, or else you can risk oxidizing your cider, leading to off flavors. Once everything is shook up, I add the airlock to allow CO2 to escape and not let anything in. If you don't have an airlock, you can just use a piece of foil over the top of your fermenter. But they are pretty cheap, so it might be worth getting one. I set the fermenter in a cool, dark area and allow it to ferment for 1 to 2 weeks, until the airlock stops bubbling. At that point, I take a final gravity reading and get a reading of 0.997, which means this cider clocks in at 7% ABV. But we're not done yet. It's time to add the mango. Adding fruit will impact the alcohol percentage because there are sugars in the mango that will reignite the yeast and ferment out, but I usually don't worry about that. Before adding the mango, some brewers might suggest transferring to a secondary fermenter before adding the fruit. A secondary allows the brewers to transfer their cider, wine, or beer off the yeast to allow the beverage to clear out. That way, the yeast and fruit additions don't make a mess and you can end up with a more defined flavor from those additions. I don't notice a difference, so I don't transfer to a secondary, but do whatever is comfortable for you. So I add 2 pounds of frozen mango into a sanitized mesh bag. I use a mesh bag because I just want the essence of mango in my cider. But if you want the full mango experience, you can puree it or just throw the chunks in whole. Just make sure that you freeze the fruit first because freezing the fruit kills any bacteria on it. You could also use fresh mango and just freeze it as well. Add the mango to the fermenter and let that sit for another 5 days, just to make sure the sugars from the mango are fermented before kegging or bottling up. After the 5 days, take a sample and taste it. If you like it, then you can move on to packaging. But if you find it's too dry, you can do what is called back sweetening. That is where you add in sugar to sweeten the cider up. Remember those preservatives I said to avoid? Well, if you want a sweeter cider, you will need to first stabilize it with something that will halt the yeast activity before adding in the sugar. Or else the yeast will just ferment the sugar again and you'll end up with a slightly stronger but still dry cider. One example is potassium sorbate. Add a half teaspoon per gallon, wait 24 hours, and then you could add sugars or even apple juice to sweeten to your liking. If you like still cider, then you can start drinking right now. But I like mine dry and sparkling, so I kegged it up as is. at 14 psi for 1 week. If you didn't back sweeten, you can also bottle it, but make sure you use a priming sugar calculator and give it a few extra days for the mango sugars to ferment out before attempting to bottle. After a week in the keg, it was ready to drink. This mango cider has a nice and dry finish. It's crisp, and because I carbonated mine at a higher pressure, it's very effervescent and tickly on the tongue. The mango adds a great floral, tropical, and almost citrusy flavor. And even though it's higher in alcohol, it really doesn't taste boozy. You have to give this a try, and get creative with the fruit you add, or add none at all. In a few weeks, I'll be showing you my apple pie hard cider that I make every fall. It's one you won't want to miss. If you have any questions about making cider, be sure to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.